we've got a dozen or so individuals whose names I would like to introduce to you if you do not know them already. As I said, I'll be playing clips from these individuals who have resigned courageously, and they put out a joint statement, Service in Dissent. It received some coverage. I saw that CNN did a story. I think it's made it into a few other places. They timed this to the 4th of July, the Independence Day in the United States. It opens like this. We are former U.S. government officials who resigned from our respective positions over the last 9 months due to our grave concerns with current U.S. policy toward the crisis in Gaza and U.S. policies and practices towards Palestine and Israel more broadly. We are subject matter experts representing the interagency and are a multi faith and multi ethnic community of professionals and patriots dedicated to the service of the United States of America, its people, and its values, whether in the civil service, foreign service, armed forces, or as political appointees. Each of us has sworn an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. And as our nation celebrates its Independence Day, each of us are reminded that we resign from government not to terminate that oath, but to continue to abide by it, not to end our commitment to service, but to extend it. As it continues, they conclude. This is their overarching summation of the Biden administration's policy. They say it is a failure and a threat to U.S. national security. America's diplomatic cover for and continuous flow of arms to Israel has ensured our undeniable complicity in the killings and forced starvation of a besieged Palestinian population in Gaza. This is not only morally reprehensible and in clear violation of international humanitarian law and U.S. laws, but also puts a target on America's back. This intransigent policy risks U.S. national security and the lives of our service members and diplomats, as has already been made evident by the killing of 3 U.S. service members in Jordan in January and the evacuations of diplomatic facilities in the Middle East. They articulate the current crisis. They spend time on the policy choices that have been made, that there are 37,000 Palestinians that have been killed, at the least. That's an undercounting, but at the very least. That rather than holding the government of Israel responsible for its role in arbitrarily impeding humanitarian assistance, the United States has cut off funding to the single largest provider of humanitarian assistance. That would be UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestinians. There's further concerns, particularly since October 2023, that all policy has simply contributed to immense humanitarian harm. U.S. policies in this regard, they continue, have been deeply damaging, not only for U.S. relations in the region, but for our global credibility. Then they walk through how it went wrong, what happened, and here they lay out, honestly, the brutality and the repression that has been endorsed by U.S. government officials and by this political administration, by President Joe Biden. In our collective experience, we have seen for years the silencing of concerns about Israel's human rights record and the failure of the Oslo process and broader U.S. policy. We have seen debate silenced in government, facts distorted, laws sidestepped, and willfully ignored, even violated, and lawyers working overtime to avoid faithfully implementing the law. We have seen America in a process turned on its head, a rush to arm Israel, even as civilians are massacred with U.S. arms, and efforts to share intelligence with Israel that have contributed to this catastrophe. We have seen peaceful protests met with rancid accusations of anti-Semitism and with violence, while an administration has previously fought for free speech on college campuses, stood by Okay, while an administration that previously fought for free speech on college campuses stood by as it was silenced. We have seen unconditional U.S. support for Israeli military operations in Gaza who make it impossible to advocate for human rights in the Middle East and lead regional advocates to turn their backs on our diplomats. We have seen a U.S. government that dehumanizes both Palestinians and Jews, making the former victims of its weapons and the latter scapegoats for its war machine. I'm going to just read that again. That's a very powerful sentence. We have seen a U.S. government that dehumanizes both Palestinians and Jews, making the former victims of its weapons and the latter scapegoats for its war machine. We have seen an administration that to Congress and a Congress that punishes the truth. The House just passed a bill that says you can't mention the casualty count, the number of Palestinians who have been massacred or killed by the Israeli military. So, as we continue, they lay out fundamentally what they believe should be done, that the US should execute the law. It's abundantly clear that the administration is currently willfully violating multiple US laws, attempting to deny or distort facts, use loopholes, or manipulate processes to ensure a continuous flow of lethal weapons to Israel. And second, they say, we believe the US government should use all necessary and available leverage to bring the conflict to an immediate close and achieve the release of all hostages. We believe the US should also commit the funding and the support needed to ensure an immediate expansion of humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza. Believe the US should immediately announce that the policy of the US will be to support self-determination for the Palestinian people. We believe there is an urgent need for change in the organizational cultures and structures that have enabled this approach. We believe freedom of speech is under threat in this country, and we abjure political pressure on colleges and universities in particular that have led to a militarized police response to peaceful protests. We call upon the U.S. government, including the Departments of Education and Justice, to take any and all necessary steps to protect free speech and nonviolent protest. Amen. They're cognizant of the fact that others need to step forward. And we'll talk about this fear. We talk about the risks that people take coming forward to resign. They appeal to their former colleagues. Your voice matters. We write to you with hope that you will use your positions to amplify calls for peace. Hold your respective institutions accountable to the violence unfolding in Palestine. We thank those of you who are working day in and day out to press for just an equitable policies that protect all lives. We recognize the systemic obstacles you face, both as you perform your work and as you consider leaving it. We particularly embrace those of you representing America's diversity who feel that your voices have been disempowered, ignored, and tokenized. We are with you, and we know that a better way is possible, but only when we are all brave enough to challenge institutions and outdated forces that attempt to silence us. We encourage you to keep pushing. In our experience, no decision point is too minor to challenge. So while you are in government service, use your voice, write letters to leaders in your agencies, bring up your disagreements with your team. Speaking out has a snowball effect, inspiring others to use their voice. There is strength in numbers, and we urge you to not be complicit. We encourage you to consult with your inspectors general, with your legal advisors, with appropriate members of Congress, and via other protected channels to question the veracity and or legality of specific actions or policies. There are resources, and you have advocates, including all of us, who can support you in speaking your truth. And so, as they lay out there, this is the call to others to come forward and be whistleblowers. As I said, some of these individuals are whistleblowers in the sense that they can tell us by pulling back the curtain what is happening in the State Department and how they are allowing human rights to be systematically violated, how they are allowing this bloodshed to continue through their complicit acts and their acts of encouragement for the military and the Israeli military and all of the government officials who are perpetuating this violence. The unified statement, service in dissent is the umbrella for this, a joint statement of U.S. government officials who have resigned over U.S. policy toward Gaza, Palestine, and Israel. I'm going to play the first clip here. But as we go down, I've got this before me. There's a timeline of resignations. And the timeline for these resignations, they span from as early as October 18th, 2023. That's only about 11 days after the October 7 attack. That's pretty quick. That your conscience was pretty good if you immediately saw the response to the October 7th attack and came forward right away. And that's what Josh Paul did. Many people have had a chance to see Josh Paul do interviews. He was the first public face to emerge, to resign from the State Department. He was a director of congressional and public affairs for State Department's Bureau of Political Military Affairs for more than 11 years. He oversaw U.S. arms transfers to Israel and other countries, in particular, the process of notifying Congress. Upon resigning, upon leaving, he alerted the public to the fact that shipments of U.S. military weapons and equipment were not going through standard human rights vetting like tens of thousands of arms sales do each year. He further claimed that the space for debate and the ability to mitigate some of the worst possible outcomes of arms sales had disappeared. And so I'd like to play this for you. He, has been a voice out there that has positively contributed and inspired others to come forward. He's spoken at least one massive demonstration that was organized by activists at protests in and around the White House.
Typically, there is a very robust policy process in the State Department for arms transfers, and there are a lot of those, right? So we're talking about 20,000 arms sale cases a year that the State Department processes, which could be anything from bullets to radios to fighter jets. And for each of those, there is a lengthy process sometimes that looks at, what are the pros and cons of the sale, what are its human rights implications. That has not happened in this context for Israel. And as I say, when I raised those concerns against the existing laws, against the existing policies, there was no appetite for that discussion. I have not personally spoken to Secretary Blinken about this, nor certainly to President Biden. But I know that in the time since I left, there has been increasing discussion within the State Department, but has not led to any change of policies. In fact, as you heard earlier on your show, Vice President Harris was just saying yesterday that we will not place any conditions whatsoever on our arms to Israel. And that is unlike any arms transfer decision I've ever been a part of. There's always discussion about should we condition this to address human rights issues.
And so that was Josh Paul. This is an interview that was back at I believe it was at the end of October. He's on Democracy Now! Nothing has changed, really. There was one paused shipment of 2,000-pound bombs. And in the meantime, while pausing a shipment of weapons, it was the Biden administration that requested that a new package of millions of dollars, actually might be billions of dollars, that another massive arms package be authorized for the Israeli government to be used in the future. And they already have quite an arsenal thanks to the United States. There's Mohammed Abu Hashem, who we were recently introduced to, and he hasn't done an interview yet. I don't have a clip, but I want to honor him because he's a Palestinian American who was in the U.S. Air Force for 22 years. He's a first sergeant. An Israeli attack killed his aunt, more than 20 neighbors. As of July 1st, he has survived the killing of 5 of his relatives. He's lived through that, received the news that 5 more of his family have been killed in this war. He was the first to resign who has had family killed. And part of why he resigned, he told the Washington Post, was because it was extremely emotional. Knowing the amount of bombs that are being supplied to Israel was the cause of her death. He's talking about his aunt. He gave this interview to the Washington Post. He just came forward last month in June. If I go forward, there's Riley Livermore, and Riley is a U.S. Air Force person who started his resignation in October. Also, I need to say that in the military, it takes longer to resign. You put in your resignation, and the military has to approve it. You're seeking a conditional discharge or some kind of an honorable discharge so that you can still be eligible for all the things that you take with you after you leave the military. So you have Mohammed Abu Hashem, and then you have Riley Livermore also in the Air Force. Riley spoke to Intercept reporter Prem Thacker. He's been in the Air Force since 2012, worked in Israel as a flight test engineer on missile guidance research. Shortly after the assault was launched by the Israeli military, he decided he could no longer be a part of the Pentagon. He said, I don't want to be working on something that can turn around and be used to slaughter innocent people. And something he found frightening was what we've seen from like the publication 972 Mag. We've learned about Israel's ability to use artificial intelligence systems to particularly further their massacres of Palestinians, the way that they engage in this killing. Harrison Mann is the next person I want to share. Some of these individuals are publishing their own resignation letters that they're making public. Harrison Mann is another person in the military, so he delays his resignation, but on November 1st, he makes it known to his superior officers or the people who he answers to that he will be leaving. He was at that moment an executive officer in the Middle East Africa Center of the Defense Intelligence Agency, where he had been for over 2.5 years. I'm going to play this clip of Harrison Mann. He was on Zateo. He was on the show that Mehdi Hassan has hosted.
I began my resignation in November. I did not share the reasons until months later in April. But the war in Gaza and our role in it and my contribution to that was the straw that broke the camel's back, and the reason I ultimately understood I could not do this work anymore. By November, the course of the war was already, I think, quite clear to me and to anybody who follows this topic in the national security community. And I knew that as long as I stayed, I'd be contributing to this campaign that had already demonstrated basically was going to be indiscriminately killing civilians at an industrial scale. It was going to proceed without the Israeli military really having a realistic or achievable plan, theory of victory or way to end the war. It was going to provoke a lot of dangerous reactions from adversaries around the region that was going to endanger, obviously Israel and also U.S. forces in the region. And it was clear that U.S. support was going to be unwavering in spite of all that. And I kind of lost hope that there was going to be any change of course. And so I knew each day that I stayed, I was going to be contributing to that.
You made a decision that most within the US government have not made, which is to resign over unqualified US support for the government of Israel. You mentioned how you felt alone when you saw the destruction in Gaza, but you say in the letter that you later realized people are just scared to voice similar opinions. Is there a culture of fear within the United States government, within the US military, when it comes to discussing Israel's actions, US involvement in those actions? Are employees expected not to speak about such things?
I think in the communities that I've come up in, which is the military and DoD and now the intel community, there's a strong set of professional norms, which I think are productive, which is people do not discuss politics or other controversial topics. And I think everyone understood that this was a politicized topic, And so people did not feel comfortable discussing it the same way we would not ask each other, who we voted for, or thoughts on other potentially disruptive issues.
The point he's illustrating is that there is a disincentive to dissent. There is a disincentive to raise your voice, because if you are doing it, you're seen as confrontational and you're seen as political. You're seen as somebody who isn't just there to do the job. You're making a political statement, or you're acting out a political agenda, and that can make you fearful. And that's the culture of fear, is that you'll be isolated and hounded because you have now shown yourself to be maybe ideological. You could be accused of being out to engage in some campaign. And so Harrison Mann, he left the US military, left the Defense Intelligence Agency. And another person who resigned is Tariq Habash. Tariq Habash is noteworthy because he is the first political appointee in President Joe Biden's administration to resign. Resigned on January 3rd of this year. He worked as a policy advisor in the Department of Education's Office of Planning, Evaluation, and Policy Development. So he doesn't have any involvement in the U.S. operations or programs to support the Israeli government. I'm going to play a clip where he lays out his reasoning for resigning. But what I think is really good about a person like Tariq Habash, especially from the Department of Education, is that we have seen the role that this department has played, the complicity it has had in the repression on university and college campuses. And he states very clearly in his resignation letter that was shared that the impact the violence has had on American colleges and universities, Jewish, Muslim, and Arab students on college campuses have expressed feeling less safe. We have seen alarming violence across the United States against Palestinian and Muslim Americans who have been shot, stabbed, and even hit by cars, and that the Department of Education has failed to protect all students who exercise their First Amendment rights to engage in nonviolent protests, including in solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza. And having somebody who can speak up while he is dissenting, he is speaking up for the young students who are dissenting at great risk to their futures.
For me, as a Palestinian American, as a Palestinian man, as a Palestinian Christian, my identity is intertwined with everything that's been happening. And the reality is that there has been a near daily dehumanizing effect of our current policies and just what is allowed to persist in terms of the aggression against Palestinian life. And I, for weeks used every avenue I could to raise concerns about these policies, to emphasize the importance of humanizing Palestinians, Palestinian men too, Palestinian Christians who are a significant minority in the region now. And, that message it fell on deaf ears. And it was clear the only thing that I could do in this moment to emphasize my consternation, my concern with the ongoing policy was to resign.
So when you say it fell on deaf ears, what actually happened? Did people just tell you just to keep quiet and not mention it? Or how did it unfold?
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily like keep quiet. The White House held listening sessions, policy briefings, which was mostly just communicating to us what their assessment of the region is, of the circumstance as it was unraveling. Within the Department of Education, there was a lot of understanding, even from the secretary himself, who I met with and spoke with on numerous occasions, about how the violence was affecting me on a personal level. There was a lot of patience and just constant support from my own building. But I think, being able to communicate about that on a personal level is very different from acknowledging how the broader policies are affecting millions of people in the region and also millions of Americans who broadly support an end to this violence and permanent ceasefire.
That is Tarek Habash, who was the first political appointee of the Biden administration to resign. And I said that was back in January. So we moved to Anel Shalin, who has been one of the other dissenters to get a fair amount of media attention. She's done a fair number of interviews. She was part of, I think it was Responsible Statecraft or the Quincy Institute before she took a position in the State Department in the Biden administration. And she didn't last very long. So she stepped down and could not continue her role as a foreign affairs officer for the Office of Near Eastern Affairs in the State Department's Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. As a representative of a government that is directly enabling what the International Court of Justice has said could plausibly be a genocide in Gaza, such work has become almost impossible. So she can no longer promote human rights. And this is in her op-ed that she had published on March 28th, 2024. She was public about her resignation. My colleagues and I watched in horror as this administration delivered thousands of precision-guided munitions, bombs, small arms, and other lethal aid to Israel, and authorized thousands more, even bypassing Congress to do so. So here is, I have a clip of her. This is Anel Shalin, who was on Brianna Joy Gray's Bad Faith. That podcast is no accident that I selected this, because Brianna Joy Gray herself has been fired for continuing to do her segments on the Israeli government, on apartheid against Palestinians, on what was happening in the war on Gaza, challenging propaganda and lies, and to a degree that led her to be fired from her position at the Rising on the Hill.
What was the impetus for your choice to resign?
Yeah, so I resigned over the administration's Gaza policy, and specifically the elements that I found that made it impossible for me to continue working for the administration were that they were not upholding U.S. laws, that there all are laws that if a foreign government is blocking U.S. humanitarian assistance, they are no longer eligible to receive American military assistance, which is what Israel is doing. And also things like the Leahy laws, when you have foreign militaries committing gross violations of human rights, they are no longer eligible to receive assistance. And this has also been documented numerous times. And yet, the flow of money and weapons to Israel continues unabated. So I decided that I would resign and that I would do so publicly in March, after, as you said, just having been at State a brief time. And I'm, now working at the Quincy Institute, which I had come from the think tank sector. I had previously been employed at Quincy and luckily was able to go back there. And so feel very privileged to have landed. Whereas, I think that's a big question for many people who are thinking about resigning, is this question of, well, it's hard to not have a job or health insurance in this country. If you have kids, I have one little girl, a mortgage, it's really difficult to contemplate giving up your stability. So I do feel very privileged to have been able to go back into the think tank sector.
So now we have, as we continue through our list of dissenters, we have Ana del Castillo, who we just learned about. We just learned about her because Anna signed on to the unified statement. No interviews, but the first known White House official to leave the Biden administration over the war on Gaza, was part of the Office of Management and Budget. Halarit resigned in April 2024, put out an op-ed, worked for nearly 2 years as a spokesperson for the State Department's regional media hub for the Middle East and Africa, based in Dubai. She appeared on Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya, BBC Arabic, Asharq Al Awsat, and Independent Arabia to discuss numerous global issues. She was a foreign service officer for the State Department for 18 years, and published her own, as I said, op-ed to announce her resignation. But here's a clip that I can play of her on France 24, and this is a news channel that she was able to go on and speak to why she resigned and how this works, how it really works for whistleblowers in the State Department.
So, Hillary, the war begins October 7th. What brings you to that decision to tender your resignation?
Well, it was a very agonizing decision, honestly. I've been a diplomat for 18 years. I never expected to resign, but it was day after day, human rights violation after human rights violation that led me to finally decide I could no longer be part of the system, and I needed to get out of the system in order to be able to speak freely about what's really happening. And what's happening is a violation of US law. It's a violation of international law that is keeping neither Palestinians nor Israelis any safer.
The U.S. State Department refusing to comment your resignation, but they did, one of their spokespeople did say that there are channels where, quote, our workforce can share their points of view. There's sort of I guess a forum where as a diplomat you can speak out. Your thoughts on that? How does it work when you have a grievance when you don't agree with policy?
Absolutely. As I mentioned, I've been a diplomat for 18 years. This is not the first policy that I've disagreed with. But my resignation had nothing to do with my personal opinion. It had everything to do with the fact that I'm an American diplomat and I've been monitoring the situation on the ground. We do have mechanisms in place in order to explain to Washington what the issues are, what the problems are. And that's what we've been using. And that's honestly what kept me in for as long as it did after October 7th and throughout these last 7 months, is being able to explain to Washington from everything that we were seeing that there was a significant backlash against the United States because of our policy in Gaza, that growing anti-Americanism was fueling a lot of hatred. And also at the end of the day, that even the families of the hostages that deserve to go back home, they themselves are protesting against Netanyahu's government and are insisting an end to the violence, an end to the war. The diplomatic solution is what needs to be pursued, not more bombs.
So that's Halarit, and a State Department employee for 18 years who, as you hear, is describing that there is a dissent channel. I think that's what she's referring to. And she's talking about the ways in which you can forward your opinions and your insights on how you're observing developments in your region. That is your responsibility. And she did that. And the fact that there was this avenue available kept her in the State Department longer than probably she would have stayed if there was no mechanism for exchanging these communications. It's kind of whistleblowing, but not really. And it's somewhat ineffective. I mean, they know that this channel is being used the way it is being used, or they know this is dissenting from lower ranking State Department employees. And it can color someone like Secretary of State Antony Blinken's understanding, but mostly there is a resistance. I think if you observe the way that this is treated, they insist that, just because they are receiving this dissent doesn't mean they have to change their policy. We have next Lily Greenberg Call. Lily Greenberg Call has done several interviews, and she resigned on May 15th, 2024, the first Jewish American political appointee. Her job, her position was within the Interior Department, and she announced her resignation on Nakba Day, which recognizes the destruction of Palestinian society and its homeland in 1948 and the displacement of the majority of the Palestinian people for the formation of today's modern Israel. So Greenberg-Call, in her resignation letter, connected what she's done to her Jewish identity, and also spoke a bit about indigenous peoples issues, I want to say. So here is a clip that I have pulled. This is from Middle East Eye, and she was on a show to discuss why she resigned. Here's Lily Greenberg-Call.
Lily, I want to start off with the question that, everybody's been asking you, basically. May 15th, why did you resign from the Department of the Interior?
Because I could no longer represent this administration and serve. So I was a political appointee, which we serve at the pleasure of the president, right? There's a difference in the United States between career folks whose jobs are who stay in government no matter who the administration is, and folks like me who are politicals who are appointed by the White House, and our job is to really execute the policy of the administration, and that was no longer something I could do. As over these last 8 months, we've seen the president continue to express really unconditional support for Israel's actions in Gaza, and also I felt that he's really using my community, which is the Jewish community, as justification for that, right? And continually saying he's the most powerful person in the world with the largest platform in the world, that what's happening to Palestinians is necessary to keep Jewish people safe. And I don't agree with that. And I think it's actually quite the opposite. I think what is happening to Palestinians is not only disastrous for them, but also disastrous for the Jewish community around the world. And I could no longer, for my own integrity with myself, represent his administration. I thought, once I made this decision that it was something I had to do for myself, given how, like I said, the most powerful person in the world is continuing to back Israel's actions and also to use this framework of Jewish safety. I thought I am a pretty good messenger because of who I am and because of my background to undermine that message. And I think it's important that, people can do anything they can in this moment to undermine that message, and also, take whatever risk is necessary to try and protect Palestinian life. I mean, so it was a decision for myself, and then it was a decision that, I have the chance to make a sacrifice here that could actually hopefully make an impact.
All right, that is Lily Greenberg-Call, and as she says, it's her intent to wield her Jewish identity and perhaps open up some space and to challenge this idea that those who are protesting or who oppose the war on Gaza are anti-Semitic, or that they are fueling Jewish hate, making it unsafe for Jewish people. There are groups like Jewish Voices for Peace that have been on the forefront of activism from the very beginning of these protests against the war. And part of having them step forward is to undermine what we see from AIPAC, for example, to make it harder for them to traffic in this nonsense that people are simply attacking a government for trying to have a country that is a haven for Jewish people. We all see this is a project, an apartheid project. So we have Alexander Smith. Alexander Smith was a part of the United States Agency for International Development. And what he says, I'm not going to give him much introduction, because on Democracy Now!, this was set up pretty easily for people to get an insight into the rot that is going on inside of the U.S. government.
explain what happened, how your presentation was canceled? It was a competition for having this place, this address, where Samantha Powers also addressed the conference. Can you talk about what happened?
Good morning. Yes, absolutely. I would like to talk about what happened, but I also do want to keep the focus on the people of Gaza and the West Bank, and not make the headline about a privileged white guy who resigned his job. But yes, I'm happy to talk about what happened. Back in February, I submitted an abstract to the conference. It's a global gender equality conference that was going to be held in May. And that abstract was one of 368 that were submitted. One of the themes of the conference was going to be on intersectionality and maternal health. And I thought this would be an excellent opportunity to talk about Gaza. As we know, there are severe limitations for women to reach health facilities, where previously Gaza used to have very good attendance of skilled birth attendants. Now almost all of the hospitals are non-functioning. And so I submitted my abstract. To my surprise, it was accepted in March. It went through 3 tiers of review. There were about 35 reviewers involved, and it was outsourced to an outside organization to review as well. So it was accepted, and I was very excited, and I was thrilled to have a chance, a platform to talk about maternal and child health outcomes in an ongoing crisis. The day before, the Monday before the Wednesday that I was going to present, I was told that I needed to meet with the Middle East Bureau colleagues and submit my slides. I did that. The slides went through many layers of editing and comments. I received a language guide. I was told to remove words like Palestine, Palestinians, Israel, Gaza border, and several others. And then there was a column of preferred language. I went along with that. I removed the word Palestine from the organization name UNFPA Palestine because that was objected to. I removed a map that UN OCHA provided that was acknowledged as an accurate map, but that couldn't be included because it showed the borders and the sea borders of Gaza. Also on that Monday, I was told this is a very sensitive issue because an hour before we were having our chat, the ICC request for an indictment came down from the prosecutor. And so I was told that it's a sensitive issue because of that. I mentioned that I was a legal fellow at the ICC back when I was in law school, that I had worked on specifically starvation as a weapon of war, and that was an area of interest of mine, and that I thought it would be useful to talk about international humanitarian law frameworks as they apply to every country, Gaza included.
Alexander Smith, describing how he was censored. This is someone who was at the U.S. Agency for International Development. And Samantha Powers surfaces. There's someone that I've thought about throughout the last 9 months and how hollow her doctrine of responsibility to protect has proven, and how she's demonstrated that there's an emptiness to it, and that it only applies to those countries in which the U.S. can go in and exploit or obtain some kind of advantage. If an ally or if a country that has been a close friend of the U.S., if a government that we are so intertwined with starts committing mass murder, then responsibility to protect goes entirely out the window. It's responsibility to quietly help out behind the scenes, not look like you're too supportive ever, but to act like you're there to make it less bad. I mean, like, it's kind of like a lesser of two evil kind of a thing. The U.S. has positioned itself as if, as long as we're involved, we can curtail this. Like, it would be way worse if the Israeli government was just madly bombing without U.S. support. And that's proven the responsibility to protect doctrine to be another version, another iteration, another expression of U.S. imperialism, a perhaps more perfected way of advancing the empire project's goals. Because it's at the moment not a U.S. government goal to have a free Palestine. It's not a goal to allow self-determination. It's not a goal or an objective to have a country in which Jewish Israelis and Palestinians can coexist and live without having this kind of destruction and bloodshed. I think after this era, after this moment, after this war, figures like Samantha Power should be just as detested as someone like Henry Kissinger for what they have allowed to unfold. And for Alexander Smith to try and put on a presentation that brought some humanity to Palestinians and then to be censored that way, it's awful. Stacey Gilbert is the next dissenter. She resigns on May 28th, 2024. Alexander Smith resigns on May 27th, 2024. A day later, she comes forward. And she comes forward because the State Department is working on this report about how countries that receive arms shipments from the U.S. comply with international humanitarian law. You may have heard of this. It was called NSM 20 report. That doesn't really mean anything to the average citizen, but break it down. What it is a documentation for Congress of whether these countries should continue to receive weapons shipments if they're violating the law or they're engaged in human rights abuses. Those are supposed to be curtailed. There's supposed to be steps taken to ensure that the U.S. is not arming states that are engaged in atrocious behavior. And so we have a clip here of Stacey Gilbert going on to describe her resignation and her principled reasoning for stepping down.
Resigned after 20 years in the State Department. Can you explain to us first what led to your decision and just how difficult a decision it was for you?
So we were tasked by the White House in early February to write a report assessing two things: countries' compliance with international humanitarian law, also known as the law of war or the Geneva Conventions, and their willingness to facilitate humanitarian assistance. Israel was not the only country, but as you can imagine, it was the country that generated the most debate within the subject matter experts who were drafting the report. At some point, myself and a few other subject matter experts were removed from the report. Mm-hmm. It was moved up to a higher level, and I read the report when it was released on May 10th, and it was the first time actually that I'm aware of that we admitted that Israel is using U.S. weapons in violation of international humanitarian law. Mm-hmm. But it was also very stark that it said Israel is not blocking humanitarian assistance.
Right.
And I know that's not true. I know others know that's not true. And that was the reason I decided to resign.
So you heard the State Department spokesman saying that they stand by this report. What is your reaction to that? And how is the initial report that you worked on different from the final report that was released?
The conclusion of the subject matter experts who work in humanitarian assistance, not only in the State Department, but also USAID and the organizations on the ground in Gaza, is absolutely unanimous that Israel is blocking humanitarian assistance and has been, which is why Gaza is, why there's famine, why the hospitals have been bombed. It is so patently clear that that is what's happening. And my understanding is lawyers perhaps drafted that conclusion.
Why is the State
it is
Department not being honest then about the situation in your view?
If the determination is that any partner country is blocking humanitarian assistance, a country that is also receiving our weapons assistance, there is another consequence, a consequence under U.S. law that triggers a cessation of our security assistance. So I think they're very, very worried about making a determination that triggers those kind of consequences.
Right. What Stacey's saying is that if you make the determination that the Israeli government is blocking humanitarian aid, then you have to follow that and suspend weapons shipments. And then you infuriate Benjamin Netanyahu and the government of Israel. You upset the Israeli military, which is dependent on these U.S. arms to do what they are doing to Palestinians in Gaza. And then there will be a backlash, and then you will see reaction from the pro-Israel groups, for lack of a better way of describing them, or those who are in favor of what you could call the Zionist project. And then that is something that Joe Biden's administration will have to deal with, and they're not prepared to do so because they themselves believe in what Israel stands for. They see this apartheid regime as one that is valuable to the United States in the Middle East, and they're not willing to break free from it and part ways with that government yet, or to say that they are ready to abandon that project. And so by putting forward a report that concludes accurately what is happening on the ground, then they're now in a position where they would have to change policy. And they are resistant to changing policy. So Stacey Gilbert, like Josh Paul, who we saw in this broadcast 40 or so minutes ago, I started with him because he was the first to resign. They're, to me, both whistleblowers. Like I said, all of these people are dissenters, but a couple of them have been in positions to give us a clear understanding of how everything works. And that's somebody who knows that a human rights report was falsified, that people who were the experts, they saw that report taken from them, and then lawyers for the State Department or others in the State Department then went to work on it, changing the language so that it could cover up the truth about the war on Gaza, so that the United States wouldn't put its stamp on it and have Israel feel it was in some position where they had to change the way they were bombing Palestinians. And so that was Stacey Gilbert. The next person I want to highlight, his name is Juan Betancourt. And Juan Betancourt is a conscientious objector. He's seeking that status, but he already is one. You didn't have to ask the U.S. military to give you that status to be treated as one outside of the military. He's a conscientious objector. He's been seeking that since June 4th. He said, "I see the slaughter of thousands of innocent civilians, all while the world watches through their smartphones." He lives in Texas, and he's trying to leave the military as a conscientious objector. But no interview yet that I could find, so no clip for me to share. Then there's Larry Hebert Jr., who has been also, since June 4th, seeking conscientious objector status. So already won an airman for the U.S. Air Force for 6 years, and somebody who accelerated his effort to leave the military after 6-year-old Hind Rajab died. This is the little girl who we've been following the horrible incident that where she died because an Israeli tank shelled her family's car and then attacked an ambulance that was trying to rescue this girl. And so he was at a protest outside of the White House earlier before he tendered his resignation. And he was actually ordered back to his post in Spain, back to where he was based. He was on leave at the time. He took a moment to go outside the White House, declared that he was on a hunger strike, and it garnered attention. The Air Force took note of the fact that he was dissenting and did not like it.
Strike outside of the White House since Easter for the civilians in Gaza who are starving, being bombed, shot, killed, and raped. There's no humanity in this. There's no justification for it. It's something that has been weighing on me for a while because the military is directly responsible for aiding Israel with weapons and at the discretion of our government. It's taken a really massive toll on me personally and a lot of other people as well. But I think there's also a level of fear that active duty members have for speaking out because of the possible repercussions. Being in support of Gaza could, in their own view, could be considered publicly against the mission, which is what our foreign policy. There should never be unconditional support for anything besides humanity because they say Israel is our greatest ally. Well, even my closest friends and family are held accountable for their actions and their words. I wouldn't be friends with someone who commits a genocide. I wouldn't be friends with someone who rapes and starves civilians. It doesn't make any sense. And I think a lot of people feel that way. I'm not out here trying to influence President Biden. He's very strong on his unconditional support of Israel. What I'm here for is obviously to support the people in Palestine, but also to really give people a voice and within the military or whether that be the State Department or the government, and not be afraid to speak out because I'm taking a big risk doing this. I could face serious repercussions, but I'm willing to do that because those repercussions don't surmount to anything that the people in Gaza are going through. The hunger strike itself, I don't have a cutoff for. I just want, obviously, a positive change.
And so that's Larry Hebert, and yeah, it's at great risk to him to be out there speaking. They might come up with some kind of a charge where they could put him through a court martial for speaking out. So he has to be careful. And he also, I need to mention somebody who I haven't said their name yet, and that person can't sign on to this unified statement. They took a different route in protesting, a very extreme way of protesting, but one nonetheless that struck us all and moved those in the military and the government deeply. If they had consciences, they felt it. The day that Aaron Bushnell self-immolated outside of Israel's embassy in Washington, D.C. And he had a message. He told people beforehand why he was doing this. And knowing that it would end his life, and knowing that his sacrifice was worth it for Palestinians in Gaza, and also to end any complicity or any role that he had in this murder. So Aaron Bushnell inspired Larry Hebert and has inspired other people to come forward and be dissenters. I think Anel Shalin even spoke about Aaron Bushnell as well, of being distraught over the fact that somebody felt that this is how far they had to go because their government is so inhuman in their actions. As far as people who came forward and have identified themselves, I'm pretty sure there's nobody I'm leaving out. But if anybody who sees this video finds somebody that I did not honor today, please email newsletter@thedissenter.org, newsletter@thedissenter.org, or leave a comment in the YouTube thread here. And I'll make sure I come back to that individual and praise them and discuss the risks that they've taken, the courage that they have shown